America is broke. The $35 trillion debt time bomb. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer, where we're going to unpack a deeply urgent mathematical reality. America's national debt hitting its absolute breaking point in the year 2026. This isn't some abstract financial concept just reserved for Wall Street. This is a real situation with a ticking clock that affects every single one of us. So our goal today is to strip away the noise, look strictly at the numbers, and figure out exactly how the richest country in human history effectively finds itself out of money. We are starting with an astronomical number, $35.2 trillion. That is the total U.S. national debt as of 2026. A number with that many zeros is genuinely difficult for the human brain to even comprehend, right? We hear trillions tossed around so much in the news that we've almost become totally numb to it. But to really put the sheer absurdity of this into perspective, let's think about it in terms of time. 1,000,000 seconds is 12 days. 1,000,000,000 seconds is 31 years. 1,000,000,000,000 seconds? That's 31,000 years. And we're looking at $35.2 trillion of borrowed money. To immediately bring that massive scale down to a deeply personal level, let's look at this number, $103,000. If we took that entire $35.2 trillion debt and divided it up evenly right now, this is exactly how much of that debt falls squarely on the shoulders of every single American, born or not. Whether you're a retiree on a fixed income, a college student, or a baby born 10 seconds ago, this is your share of the bill. It's incredibly sobering when you realize this money has already been spent on our behalf. All right, moving on to Section 1, understanding the debt ceiling. Let's look at the mechanism that actually controls all this borrowing. So what exactly is the debt ceiling? It's defined as the strict maximum amount the government is legally allowed to borrow just to pay its existing bills. Imagine you have a credit card and you've completely maxed it out. The bank tells you that you can't borrow another dime until you pay that balance down. But imagine if you had the magic power to just call the bank back, have a quick meeting with yourself, and vote to raise your own limit. That has been America for the last 50 years. Congress simply raises this ceiling every single time to avoid a devastating default, which essentially hands the government a credit card with absolutely no limit.
And that brings us to a stark warning. When the U.S. hit that $35.2 trillion limit in January of 2026, the Treasury Secretary said, "We have until September to fix this." Now, notice that this isn't an actual plan to pay the money back. It is, quite literally, a terrifying ticking countdown. September 2026 becomes the drop-dead date, where, if the limit isn't artificially raised yet again, the money simply stops flowing.
Which brings us to Section 2. Where did all the money go? The crucial point here is figuring out exactly how a nation racks up a bill that large. Well, the money vanished into massive historical events and mandatory obligations. First, you've got $8 trillion spent on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. Then, the rapid response to the global pandemic, $6 trillion was printed and injected directly into the economy in just 2 short years. But this third number is the one that absolutely demands your attention: interest. In 2026 alone, the U.S. is paying $1.2 trillion just to service the debt. We aren't paying off a single cent of the principal balance with that money. To give you some context on how wild that is, that yearly interest payment now completely outpaces the entire U.S. military budget. And this brilliantly illustrates the largest single drain on the everyday federal budget. A massive 40% goes strictly to Social Security and Medicare. Now, these are absolutely vital safety nets for millions of Americans, for sure. But economically speaking, both of these programs are currently heading straight toward insolvency. They require more and more money every single year just to stay afloat, eating up a colossal chunk of the pie before a single dollar is ever spent on roads, schools, or defense. The core mathematical dilemma of this crisis is right here, and it's incredibly straightforward. The government takes in $4.9 trillion in taxes, but it spends $6.9 trillion. When your expenses outpace your income by a gap that massive, it guarantees a $2 trillion deficit every single year. We are essentially digging a brand new $2 trillion hole annually just to keep the lights on. Let's translate those incomprehensible trillions into a highly relatable household ledger. Operating our government right now is exactly like a family earning a solid salary of $50 grand a year, but choosing to spend $70 grand a year. And to bridge that gap, they simply put the remaining $20,000 on a credit card, indefinitely. Eventually, the math catches up. The interest gets so high that you can't even afford the minimum payments anymore, and that is exactly where the U.S. finds itself today. Moving into Section 3, Anatomy of a Default. Let's transition to that September 2026 deadline and map out exactly what a government shutdown and economic default actually looks like. If Congress fails to raise the ceiling, we don't just get political gridlock, we face a rapid, devastating cascade in the real world. In week 1, 50 million seniors see an immediate overnight suspension of their Social Security checks. The cash simply isn't there. By week 2, 2 million federal workers are furloughed with absolutely zero pay. And by week 3, the global financial system reacts. The U.S. credit rating crashes, causing interest rates to explode. This means everyone's personal mortgages, car loans, and credit card rates become instantly and painfully more expensive.
And as if the domestic impact wasn't bad enough, the global stakes are arguably even higher. Foreign nations currently hold $7 trillion of U.S. debt. Countries like China and Japan hold a massive portion of these treasury bonds. Our entire global financial system is built on the fundamental premise that U.S. debt is the absolute safest investment on Earth. If America defaults and these foreign nations panic and start rapidly selling off that debt, the value of the U.S. dollar itself could completely collapse, triggering a global economic meltdown.
So, Section 4, the mathematical reality. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is that we are leaving politics completely at the door.
If you turn on the news, you'll see a very familiar blame game. Democrats point the finger at tax cuts for starving the government of revenue. Republicans point the finger right back and blame out-of-control spending. But the completely impartial truth here is that for 40 years, both parties have played a massive role in this. Both parties have actively chosen to borrow, print money, and kick the can down the road rather than losing votes. Making hard financial decisions is politically dangerous, so instead of making them, the system collectively just chose debt.
Look, this isn't politics, it's just math. And the Congressional Budget Office, who is the nonpartisan referee in all of this, shows exactly where this math inevitably leads in the 2030s if we don't radically alter our trajectory. By 2033, Social Security faces mandatory, across-the-board 23% cuts. And step 2 is even crazier. By 2036, the interest alone on the national debt is projected to become larger than the entire U.S. economy.
The stark reality of 2026 is that America didn't just run out of money. We ran out of time. Ignoring the problem is quite literally no longer an option. So as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. As you look at the sheer scale of this crisis, when the music stops and the math finally forces our hand, who do you hold responsible? And when we are mathematically forced to balance the checkbook, what gets cut first?